My mother's voice still echoes in my mind, sharp, slicing cleanly through the doorway behind me as if it were made of glass. "You're ungrateful, get out and never come back." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply picked up my small bag, stepped past her and walked away without looking back. For 6 months I told myself that moment was freedom. That silence was closure. But tonight, sitting alone in my apartment while my phone vibrates non-stop across the table, I understand something I wasn't ready to admit before. The real betrayal wasn't the day they threw me out. It was what happened weeks later, the moment my father texted me. Before I continue, tell me where you're listening from, so I know I'm not speaking into the void. The family that looked perfect from the outside. My name is Violet, and if you had met me a year ago, you would have assumed I was raised in a clean suburban postcard. Holiday dinners, framed portraits, matching sweaters, the whole script. From the outside, we looked stable. Inside, everything leaned crooked, like a picture frame that refused to stay straight. My mother, Elaine, was the emotional center of the house. Loud in anger, louder when she felt wronged, and eerily silent anytime I succeeded. My father, Robert, played the role of the rational one, the voice of logic, the man who believed every problem could be solved if his children simply stepped up. And then there was my older brother, Tyler. 3 years ahead, but somehow always treated like a fragile boy who needed time to find himself. Meanwhile, I actually found myself. Scholarships, 2 part-time jobs, a corporate role in finance right out of college. I paid my own rent, my own tuition, my own life. What I didn't realize was this. The more capable I became, the more my family relied on me, quietly, steadily, completely. The slippery slope into being their provider. It started small. Groceries they forgot. Utility bills they were short on. Soon after, the mortgage. At first my help felt generous, then necessary, then expected, eventually invisible. Every Sunday I'd walk into that beige 2-story house, the one with the porch swing my dad never fixed, and Tyler would be on the couch, controller in hand, while my parents spoke in heavy sighs. And every pair of eyes eventually drifted toward me. For years I swallowed it. Family helps each other, I told myself. But the Sunday 6 months ago felt different. Heavier. They were waiting for me. I just didn't know the version of me they depended on was about to die. Life after leaving. The weeks after I left were quiet, not peaceful, just hollow. I cleaned. I worked. I cooked simple dinners. Anything to drown out the moment my mother told me to get out. I told myself I had made the right choice. And then one Thursday evening, my phone buzzed with a single notification. A text from my father. "Why haven't you paid the mortgage?" No greeting. No concern. No acknowledgement of the 6 months of silence. Just a demand. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was disbelief. I laughed, a sharp, stunned sound. They exiled me, told me never to return. And now they wanted my money. I opened my banking app and scrolled. Month after month, year after year, thousands of dollars labeled mortgage help, groceries, bills. My kindness wasn't remembered. It was assumed. They never expected Tyler to step up. They never had. In their minds, I was still the supply. My phone buzzed again. Another demand. I didn't open it. I put on my jacket and walked into the cold evening air until my anger sharpened into something clean. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was done. The text that changed everything. I went home, sat on the couch and replied, "Oh, I thought I wasn't welcome." One sentence. Calm, precise, honest. Silence followed. A charged, heavy silence. And then my phone exploded. Calls, messages, voicemails, a tidal wave of panic and entitlement. They didn't miss me. They missed my money. When I finally answered, my father launched into his speech. "We're behind on the mortgage. The bank called. You should have paid this month." I let him talk. Then I cut in. "You kicked me out. Why would I pay for a home I'm not allowed to live in?" He blamed Tyler's struggles. He defended my mother. He insisted I was the responsible one. And that was the moment everything snapped into focus. Responsible didn't mean mature. Responsible meant useful. Calling out the truths. When Mom got on the phone, her voice trembled with manufactured outrage. "You're being dramatic. Families say things they do mean." "You meant it enough to lock me out of my life," I said. She accused. I answered. She guilted. I refused. Then I called the bank. The truth hit like ice water. The mortgage hadn't been fully paid in 8 months, not even while I was sending money. Where did my money go? They never said. They never would. Tyler called next. "What the hell, Violet?" Mom's crying. I asked him the question no one ever dared ask. "What exactly have you done for this family?" Silence. It was the silence of someone who has never been held accountable. The final call. I called my parents back and said the words I had carried for years. "I paid everything while Tyler did nothing. You expected me to carry all of you. You threw me out when I stopped being convenient, and now you want my money but not me." Mom whispered, panicked. "If you don't help us, we could lose the house." "That," I said, "is between you and the bank." "Dad tried one last time. You are abandoning your family." "No," I answered. "You abandoned me the moment my usefulness mattered more than my presence." Then I ended the calls. And for the first time in my life, the chaos stayed on their side of the phone. What freedom actually felt like. In the days that followed, their calls shifted from rage to pleading to guilt. Tyler disappeared. Dad went cold. Mom sent monologues of emotional manipulation. I ignored all of it. Not out of cruelty. Out of survival. If I paid even once, the cycle would resume. So I chose myself. I walked through the city, made my coffee, breathed clean air and realized this was the first time my life truly belonged to me. They could no longer pretend I was their solution. Tyler could no longer pretend I was his excuse. And I could no longer pretend that love meant self-sacrifice. Walking away wasn't abandonment. It was self-respect. If you're listening, if any part of this story felt familiar, tell me where you're listening from. Share your experience so someone out there knows they aren't alone. And if you want more stories about boundaries, justice, and reclaiming your life, for a week after the final call, my apartment felt like a sanctuary, quiet, sunlit, unburdened. But the quiet didn't last. On the 8th morning, I woke to the sound of persistent knocking. Slow, rhythmic, deliberate. The kind of knocking that announces the visitor isn't leaving. I froze for a moment, my heart sharp against my ribs. No one visited me unannounced. No one knew this address except my employer and a few friends. When I checked the peephole, my breath stilled. My mother, on my doorstep. Her arms crossed tight to her chest, her expression a mix of indignation and desperation, an expression I knew far too well. I considered not opening the door. But something inside me, curiosity, closure, or maybe the desire to finally see them without fear, made me unlock it. I opened the door just a few inches. "Violet," she said, pushing the word out as if she were forcing it through clenched teeth. I stepped aside without inviting her in. She came in anyway. The house they lost, or the house that lost them. Mom walked straight to the center of my living room, as if claiming territory, her eyes grazing over the space like she couldn't believe I had built something without her. "You didn't answer my calls," she began. "No," I said, "I didn't." She blinked, clearly unprepared for my calmness. Then she sat down on the edge of my couch like she owned it. "The bank called again. We're in trouble, Violet." I didn't speak. I didn't rescue. I just listened. She continued, wringing her hands dramatically. They're threatening foreclosure. The house is at risk. I leaned against the counter, arms folded. And she stared at me, stunned. And she repeated, Violet, that's your home, your childhood. Everything we built is in that house. I met her eyes without flinching. You didn't think it was my home when you told me to get out. Her face tightened. That was a mistake, she said, her voice suddenly soft, almost rehearsed. You know how families fight. No, I said gently. Healthy families fight. Ours weaponized me. For a moment, my mother looked genuinely surprised, as if she had never considered the possibility that I saw through her. The lie they finally admitted. She inhaled sharply, then looked away. We didn't expect things to get this hard, she said. Your father lost hours at work. The loan adjustments changed. Tyler still refuses to get a job, I finished. She flinched just barely. He's sensitive, he needs time. He's had 30 years, I replied. Silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, she whispered something she had clearly been avoiding. We used the money you sent. Used it for what? She swallowed. For other things. Expensive dinners. Impulse purchases. Tyler's hobbies. Their comforts. All while telling me the mortgage was covered. The confirmation didn't hurt. It clarified. You lied to me for years, I said quietly. She shook her head quickly. It's not lying, we just didn't tell you everything. That, I said, is literally the definition of lying. She closed her eyes as if my words were too sharp, too honest, too unforgiving. The boundary they couldn't manipulate. Violet, she said, her voice rising, we're your family. You can't turn your back on us now. I walked to the window, letting the morning sunlight hit my face. I'm not turning my back, I said. I'm simply not throwing myself under the bus anymore. You're being cold, she snapped, heartless. No, I said, just finally done. Her face twisted, anger, disbelief, the unraveling of a narrative she had clung to for years. Then she switched tactics, the classic one. Tears, real, forced. With my mother, it never mattered. They were always a tool. She whispered, we'll lose everything. No, I corrected softly. You'll lose the house, but you might finally find yourselves. She looked up sharply, offended. I added, and before you ask, no, I will not pay, not now, not later, not ever again. The temperature in the room changed. It was the first time in her life someone told her no and meant it. The part that broke the script. Mom stood abruptly, wiping her cheeks as if erasing a failed performance. You're making a mistake, she said. No, I said calmly, I'm breaking a cycle. She walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. When the house is gone, she said, you'll regret this. I shook my head. When the house is gone, I replied, maybe you'll finally understand how much I carried. She opened the door, but before she left, I said the one thing I knew she wasn't expecting. Mom. She turned. I hope you learn something from this, I said, not cruel, just honest, because pain is the only teacher you've ever respected. For the first time, my mother had no comeback. She stepped out, closed the door behind her, and the silence that filled my apartment afterward wasn't empty. It was peaceful. It was mine. My mother had been gone for less than an hour when another knock sounded at my door. But this one was different. It wasn't hesitant. It wasn't pleading. It wasn't polite. It was loud, short, impatient, rhythmic. The kind of knock that said, open up, I'm owed your time. I didn't need a peephole to know who it was. Tyler. When I opened the door a few inches, he pushed it wider without asking, brushing past me like he was still walking into the childhood home we'd once shared. He stopped in the center of my living room, the same place my mother stood earlier, and looked around with an expression that hovered somewhere between bitterness and disbelief. "So this is where you've been hiding," he said. I closed the door slowly behind him. "I'm not hiding," I replied. "I'm living." He scoffed. The sound was as familiar as breathing. Tyler's anger, the kind that comes from entitlement, not pain. "What the hell did you say to Mom?" he demanded. "Nothing untrue." He glared at me, jaw tight, hands clenched. Not because he was worried about our mother. No, Tyler was angry because the system he benefited from was collapsing. "Mom's crying," he said. "Dad's furious. The bank keeps calling. Everything's falling apart because you're being selfish." His words hit the room like a cold wind. And for the first time in our lives, I didn't shrink. I didn't soothe. I didn't step in to clean a mess. "Selfish," I repeated. "I funded that house while you sat on the couch." "That's not fair," he snapped. "You know I've been going through things." I tilted my head slightly. "Oh, what things?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then settled for a glare. "Personal things." I nodded. "Yes, your personal refusal to grow up. Your personal avoidance of responsibility. Your personal comfort living off someone else's work." His cheeks flushed, anger or shame, I couldn't tell, and didn't care. "How dare you," he said. "I'm your brother." "And I'm your sister," I replied, "not your parent." The truth he never expected me to say. Tyler took a step closer, towering over me like he used to when we were kids. Except this time I didn't back down. "You always act like you're better than us." Or he hissed. "No," I said simply. "I just acted like an adult. None of you ever joined me." His eyes flickered, momentary disbelief, then something more raw. He sank onto the couch, rubbing the back of his neck. "You don't get it, Violet," he said. "They expect me to fail, they always have. You were the reliable one." There it was. The confession sitting beneath years of resentment. "Do you even hear yourself?" I asked. "You're angry that they expect more from me and nothing from you." His silence was an admission. The real reason he came. He looked up at me finally, eyes not angry now but hollow. "I came because Dad said there's no way out unless you help." I stared at him. "You mean unless I pay?" He didn't confirm, but he didn't deny. "Tyler," I said quietly, "why haven't you gotten a job, a real one?" His jaw tightened again, but his shoulders slumped, as if he'd been waiting for someone to ask him honestly, directly. "Because I don't know what I'm good at," he muttered. "I don't know where to start, and I didn't have to because you always fixed everything." The words hung in the room. He had said the truth my parents were too proud, too manipulative, or too afraid to admit. "You're the safety net," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "and without you I'm nothing." The sadness of that sentence was almost painful. But it wasn't my sadness to carry. The moment the roles finally shifted, I walked over and sat across from him, not close but not far. "Tyler, listen carefully," I said. "I'm not your safety net, and I never should have been." He looked up at me, eyes glossy with frustration or humiliation. "You have to figure out your own life now," I said gently but firmly. "You can't keep leaning on me. You can't keep waiting for someone else to save you." He swallowed hard. "And the house?" he asked. I held his gaze. "That's between you, Mom, Dad, and the bank, not me." He exhaled shakily, a sound halfway between a breath and a surrender. "So that's it," he whispered. "That's it," I said. He nodded slowly, as if the reality was finally sinking in, not the loss of the house, but the loss of the version of me he depended on. Tyler stood, walked to the door, then paused. "You're really not coming back, are you?" "No," I said softly, "not to the person I was in that house." He opened the door, stepped out, and murmured something I never expected to hear from him. "I don't know what to do now." I answered honestly. "That's the first step, now you get to find out." He left without another word. And for the first time since childhood, Tyler faced the world without me holding him up. The days that followed were quieter than I expected, but quieter in a different way than before. Before, silence had been suffocating, heavy with the weight of unspoken responsibility. Now it was steady. It was deliberate. It was mind. The bank call that finally landed. 2 weeks after Tyler's visit, the bank called my father directly. "You're behind," the voice said. "We'll have to start foreclosure proceedings if the mortgage isn't brought current." No text. No indirect blame. No expectation that I would intervene. For the first time, the consequences of their choices were landing where they belonged, on them. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply let it be. My parents finally heard the truth. A week later, I received a message from my father. "We are trying to fix things. Please, we need your advice." I didn't respond because I hated them. Not because I didn't care, but because they had a long history of confusing my care with my obligation. For years, I had been the solution to every problem they refused to solve themselves. Now they had to face the reality without me. And face it they did, slowly, painfully, inexorably. Tyler got a job. A small one at first, but it was his own. He learned what it meant to contribute, to be responsible, to feel the sting of consequences. Mom cried less when she called me. But I could hear the tension in her voice, recognition, finally, that I was no longer the crutch she had depended on. Dad, he learned the hard way that logic doesn't excuse neglect. The house didn't burn down, but it got frighteningly close. And he finally understood the weight he had long offloaded onto me. The moment I realized freedom. One evening, sitting in my apartment, I watched the city lights flicker against the windowpanes. I was making dinner. Simple, ordinary. My own music played softly in the background. And I realized I had not thought about paying their bills for months. I had not felt guilt. I had not felt like a caretaker. I had not even thought of myself as responsible for anyone else's failures. I was free. Not perfect. Not invincible. But free. And that freedom carried its own beauty. Clarity, I saw my family for who they were, not for who I wished they could be. Boundaries, I finally knew that saying no is sometimes the kindest choice for everyone involved. Self-respect, I understood that love is not obligation, and responsibility is not self-sacrifice. I had walked away. I had faced the storm. I had refused to be manipulated, drained, and assumed. And I had lived to rebuild myself. What I learned: families can be complicated, even toxic, even ungrateful. But liberation is not betrayal. Self-respect is not cruelty. And letting others face the consequences of their own choices is sometimes the most honest act of love, or at least of honesty. The final thought: I never went back. I never picked up the phone to pay another bill. I let them deal with their own chaos. And in that space I finally found myself. Because freedom isn't just walking away. Freedom is standing still while the world tries to pull you back, and choosing every time to remain steady, unshaken, and entirely your own.